So I'm David Hempton, Dean of the Harvard Divinity School, and it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here to the first session of the spring semester of our monthly Religions and the Practice of Peace colloquium. Thank you for joining us for tonight's very important event, which RPP is delighted to be co-sponsoring with Harvard Divinity School's Racial Justice and Healing Initiative, and for the first time also partnering with the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at Harvard Law School. So thank you for those collaborations. I'd especially like to welcome and thank our panelists, Chaplain Clementina Chéry, Monalisa Smith, Stanley Pollack, to be joined by Tay Johnson and John Brown, our Respondent David Harris, and last but not least, our Moderator Liz Walker, for taking the time to be with us this evening and for all the preparations you've made for giving up your evenings. I'm really, really grateful. So thank you for being here. We'd like to express our appreciation to Karen and Al Budney for their generous support of RPP, and as always to our wonderful team of volunteers and the RPP team here at Harvard Divinity School. So tonight we'll be exploring the topic Healing, Bridge Building and Empowerment to address gun violence, inspiration from Boston's African American communities. This session follows on another we hosted with the Racial Justice and Healing Initiative last March on transforming racialized divides, which if you missed, and was a great session, so if you missed that, you can find it on video in the RPP series archives on the RPP website in Harvard Divinity School. One of the points highlighted in our conversations with the presenters at that session, and that was Dr. Leah Gunning Francis and Dr. David Anderson Hooker, is the innovative and inspirational work being done in African American communities to address the sources and effects of gun violence. The problem of gun violence is a pervasive one affecting all our communities across the United States, and events in recent years, including the highly publicized shootings by police and the alarming levels of gun-related deaths in some of our cities, have stimulated increased public discussion of the impact of gun violence on African American communities. As Boston has been in the forefront of community-based initiatives working on this issue for many years, we're very grateful for this opportunity to hear from leaders of some of the local organizations that have been making important contributions in this area, to learn from your experiences and approaches, and to hear in particular about the role of religious and spiritual resources in your work. So as we have a full panel this evening, and you'll already be fed up with this accent, without further ado, I'd like to turn the session over to Reverend Liz Walker, the pastor of Roxbury Presbyterian Church, whom we're very proud to have as a Harvard Divinity School alumna, and most honored to have you as our moderator this evening. As many of you know, Liz Walker was called to ministry after 21 years as news anchor on WBZ-TV, and after 12 years of humanitarian work in war-torn Sudan, where she co-founded My Sister's Keeper, a grassroots initiative that built a school for girls, the first of its kind in that country's southern region. Under Reverend Walker's leadership, Roxbury Presbyterian Church is home to the Cory Trauma Education Program, an innovative effort that addresses the epidemic of post-traumatic stress in low-income African American community, too often overrun by violence. The Trauma Education Program works to increase community awareness of PTSD, as well as improving access to mental health services and empowering community members with the skills to cope with and respond effectively to post-traumatic stress syndrome. So Reverend Walker is an advisor to the Women to Women International Leadership Program, which is creating a network of promising young activists from around the world. And she's done extensive work with the State Department in Brussels, Belgium, helping young Muslims, Christians, and Jews develop intercultural communication skills. A 2005 graduate of Harvard Divinity School, Liz is a member of the core strategy team of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, and serves on the board for the New England chapter of the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. She has also served on the board of the Tufts Health Foundation and the board of overseers for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And don't know where she gets the time to do any of this. She's been awarded many honorary degrees from numerous institutions, especially in New England, and she's a mother of 3 and grandmother of 2. So Liz, welcome back to HDS, your home, and I can't think of a better person to facilitate this special session. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Hempton, and I'm honored to be here, especially for this very important conversation. So let's get right to it. Listen to this. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and a sister to the suffering poor. I speak for those whose neighborhoods are being laid waste, whose families are being destroyed, and whose culture is being subverted. These words are inspired by a sermon given by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago at the Riverside Church in New York City, where he eloquently and courageously spoke out against the Vietnam War. Dr. King taught us how to live lives of resistance to violence wherever we find it. I suggest that we think about that tonight. While our focus is specifically about the impact of gun violence on African American communities, I would argue that it's not enough to talk about that without noting the spirit of violence that permeates our culture, and most recently, the policies and practices of those who govern this country. You see, it is all connected. Nothing good has ever come of violence, be it wars that pit nation against nation or man against man, be it an oppressive government policy or the violence of language. Now, I'm not trying to change the conversation tonight. I'm simply trying to frame it.
Amen.
In what ways, here are the questions that we're going to address tonight. In what ways can communities respond to the complex challenge of gun violence, and what spiritual and human resources might they bring to bear? So that's the question. Those are the questions that we'll talk about. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the church where I serve. I covered Roxbury for many years as a reporter and saw it one way, and I see it quite differently now that I live there and work there. The church I serve is located in the heart of Roxbury. One of the city's most troubled neighborhoods is where my church is located. And while police assure us that violent crime has consistently gone down over the past several years, and in Boston is nowhere near the crisis statistics in Baltimore, St. Louis, or Chicago, last year, according to police, there were 77 shootings, both fatal and non-fatal, in the Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan area. And police say they're optimistic that those numbers continue to go down. But that boils down to about a shooting a week. And if you live in those communities, that's like living in a war zone. Yes, we have to get rid of guns. Anybody who works on the front line, however, will tell you that is only a part of the solution. For nearly 3 years, our church has had a 501c3, the Social Impact Center, that's been engaged in educating residents in our neighborhood about the effects of and the healing from post-traumatic stress disorder. As the dean already told you, the lasting physical, psychological, and spiritual wounds of violence can impact generations. There are statistics that conclude that PTSD affects neighborhoods like ours as much as, if not more, than it affects veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In addition to the healing work, we offer at our church wraparound services to families who suffer from the collateral damage of trauma. And it is so complicated, as you will hear tonight. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, that's all connected. Our work at Roxbury Presbyterian Church is centered around a series of community conversations where each week people are invited to break bread and share their personal stories of pain and healing. We work very closely with the Justice Resource Institute, on how trauma and wounds affect the brain. We also include weekly exercise groups. We have an educational component. We have a men's recovery group and a mother's support group. We are just beginning to do what these people you'll meet tonight have been doing for a long time. We are teaching community members to participate proactively in their own healing. We believe that a church in the 21st century can no longer simply preach about a God who heals. We have to, in fact, embody the power of the God who heals. I call it doing church in a different way. And I think it's something we all have to do in the religious community. We already know that one of the biggest differences in addressing violence in our community is made when we form effective partnerships. And so we have worked with all of the people that you are seeing tonight. These are people who are on the front line of the work against gun violence and the spirit of violence in our community. So I am honored to be a part of this, to be your moderator this evening, and I'm honored to introduce to you my sisters and brothers in the struggle, because I do think it is a family struggle. And I'm going to introduce to you, to them to you, in the order that they'll speak, and then we'll hear from them. Chaplain Clementina Chéry is the founder, president, and CEO of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. The Peace Institute is a center of healing, teaching, and learning for families and communities impacted by murder, grief, trauma, and loss. Chaplain Chéry and her family founded the Peace Institute in 1994. I covered this story, that's when I met you, after her 15-year-old son, Louis, was murdered in the crossfire of a shootout. He was on his way to meet with other teenagers who were trying to stop violence. With over 2 decades of experience as a survivor serving families impacted by murder, Chaplain Chéry has developed the best practices in the field of homicide response. Her ultimate goal is to transform society's response to homicide so that all families are treated with dignity and compassion regardless of the circumstances. Chaplain Chéry and the Peace Institute were selected as 2016 Social Innovators by the Social Innovation Forum in recognition of the Institute's groundbreaking solutions to social problems. She has developed groundbreaking publications for families of murder victims and the providers who serve them, including Always in My Heart, a workbook for grieving children, and the Survivor's Burial and Resource Guide. Chaplain Chéry has received countless awards in recognition of her courageous leadership and her tireless peacemaking work. Most recently, she was named one of Boston's 100 most influential leaders of colors by Colette Phillips Communication. She was also given the 2016 Impact Award by Phillips Brooks House Association at Harvard University. Chaplain Chéry is an ordained chaplain and a lady of the Order of St. Gregory the Great, which is the highest honor bestowed by Pope John Paul II on a lay Catholic. She is an internationally recognized expert in the field of homicide response, and she is my sister. She will be first, but I'm going to introduce everybody else and then let you get out. Another of my sisters, Monalisa Smith, is the president and CEO of Mothers for Justice and Equality, a nonprofit grassroots organization in Dorchester that aims to eliminate youth violence in neighborhoods by bringing together families and communities through education and engagement. Monalisa founded MJE in 2010 after the loss of her nephew to local violence, and through a call to action gathered fellow mothers, many of whom were also suffering the loss of a child to violence, to share their concern with the gross amount of violence against children. MJE was recently selected to form a parent-police partnership advisory group with the Boston Police Commissioner. The goal of this group is to improve community policing by addressing issues of families engaging the police in community meetings. MJE received the following awards: the Boston Business Journal's Extraordinary Leadership Award, the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation's Community Leadership Award, the Asian American Civic Association's Community Leadership Award, and the Boston Globe 100 Innovation Award. Simmons College Community Partner Award, and the Provider Council Peer Leadership Award. Monalisa is a Dorchester native who has used her corporate background as Director of Community Investment for Citizens Bank to help drive this movement of mothers looking to put an end to youth violence. Stanley Pollack, in his 40-plus year career as a youth worker, a program developer, an administrator, and consultant, has dedicated his life's work to empowering urban teens to work for positive community change. In the early 1970s, Mr. Pollack concentrated his efforts on juvenile offenders in Trenton, New Jersey, and then moved to the City of Somerville's Youth Services Department, eventually becoming the director of the department in 1978. During this time, Mr. Pollack developed unique and innovative methods for engaging youth in a process of changing their communities for the better, the basis for the current teen empowerment model. From 1982 to 1991, Mr. Pollack provided consultation in the teen empowerment model to more than 35 youth-serving organizations throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In 1992, Mr. Pollack established the Center for Teen Empowerment as a nonprofit organization in Boston's South End, Lower Roxbury, an area, as we have said, that is plagued by the serious problems of youth violence, gangs, and drugs. For 25 years, Mr. Pollack has provided leadership to that organization, which has grown to 4 sites in Boston, Somerville, Mass., and in Rochester, New York, and has engaged thousands of youth in community-based, school-based, and citywide social change initiatives. Mr. Pollack continues to devise effective applications of teen empowerment methods, most recently in the areas of youth-police relations, dialogue on racial equity, violence prevention, and education reform. Now, he's a busy man, but he's also a musician, a songwriter, and a playwright. He has developed original training curricula in speech and poetry writing, and he's also the author of the book, Moving Beyond Icebreakers, an innovative guide to group facilitation, learning, and action. These people are from my neighborhood. So when we speak of America as a place of carnage, we need also talk about the people who are working to change things.
Amen.
And I am honored to say that these people are at the forefront. Stanley has brought with him, and I'd like to introduce also to you, Tay Johnson, who's a student at the Boston Community Leadership Academy and has worked as a dedicated youth organizer for teen empowerment since October 2016. Tay. Sergeant Detective John Brown is a 21-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. During his career as a patrolman, Sergeant Brown served as a member of the Youth Violence Strike Force. When promoted to sergeant, he served as a patrol force supervisor in the Roxbury and Mattapan areas of the city. When promoted to sergeant detective, he served at the homicide unit for 10 years, having investigated more than 100 homicides and other types of death investigations. Sergeant Brown was the lead investigator during the tragic 2010 quadruple shooting homicide that occurred in Mattapan. This incident involved the murder of a 2-year-old baby, his mother, along with 2 other men. In 2013, Sergeant Brown was the recipient of the Boston Police Detective of the Year Award. He has held the position of Deputy Superintendent, Criminal Investigations, a division that encompasses the Homicide Unit, the Forensic Group, and the Fugitive Unit. Sergeant Brown has partnered throughout his career with the community and groups, just as you have seen here, Mothers for Justice and Equality, the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, Teen Empowerment, and on and on and on. He has been an adjunct professor for the Boston University Prison Education Program. His efforts as deputy superintendent and effective practices involving the homicide unit were highlighted in the book American Homicide by Richard Howe and Kimberly McCorkle. Sergeant Brown is currently a detective supervisor in the Jamaica Plain and Roxbury areas of the city and an instructor at the Boston Police Academy for detective training. Our respondent this evening is David Harris. David Harris has extensive experience in many facets of civil rights issues, from police brutality and racial profiling to redistricting, domestic violence, and fair housing and community development. Prior to his position at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, he served as founding executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston. He previously served with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, both in Washington and Boston. David holds a PhD in sociology from Harvard University, a BA from Georgetown University. He has served as the president of the board of directors of the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities and chair of the Medford Human Rights Commission. He is a member of the board of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry and chair of the Massachusetts Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. This was a mouthful, but it was important to do it all at once so that when the conversations begin, they will flow. And it's also important that you know the weight, the gravitas, the who's here, who's in the room. We are here.
Amen.
And we are doing the work. And we are proud and humbled to do the work. It is not easy work, but it must be done. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start with Chaplain Chéry.
Good evening. Good evening. What an honor it is to be here with you. Thank you, Dean Hampton, for convening this series that brings together a cross-disciplinary religion and the practice of peace. First, I want to share a very important story with you. A story about Lewis Brown. He was an avid reader, a bookworm, and he was caring and compassionate. At 15, Lewis was committed to making his community a more peaceful and just place. He believed that all young people had the potential to be peacemakers, regardless of which side of the streets they come from. Lewis's long-term goal was to be the first African-American president of the United States. He was killed in a crossfire of a shootout in 1993, 5 days before Christmas. Lewis is my oldest son. When we were told that he was brain dead, my family and I left the hospital empty-handed, physically and spiritually. Back in 1993, there were no resources, no coordinated response in Boston at that time for families of murdered victims, especially families who look like me. As a mother, I needed to know who could raise a child that could kill. Over the years, I formed a relationship with Doris, a mother just like me, who did her best to raise her son Charles. Charles was the young man convicted of killing my son. I saw Doris's shame and I felt her pain. Mother to mother, woman to woman, heart to heart. That is when I realized that we were both impacted. When it came time, I did not oppose Charles' parole. Instead, I worked with Doris to make sure that there was support in place for Charles so he wouldn't cause harm to the community or end up dead himself when he returned home from prison. Between the time Lewis was killed and 2015, there has been an additional 3,511 homicides in our Commonwealth. Each murder directly affects at least 10 immediate family members. This means that there are more than 35,000 survivors of homicide victims, and many of us are in this room tonight. These numbers do not include extended families, friends, neighbors, classmates, and coworkers who are also grieving and are traumatized. Nor do these numbers include families like Doris on the other side of homicide. Research tells us that homicide is a public health issue, and it is time that we treat it that way. Families on both sides of homicide undergo emotional, physical, and financial stress, and that leads to instability, and it has a negative impact on the entire community. Addressing the impact of homicide requires a significant investment, yet not addressing it is even more expensive. From pain to peace. After we laid Lewis to rest, I needed to do something. I needed to channel this rage and anger. The Peace Institute was founded as a way of honoring the legacy of a young Black teen and to give a voice to the many other Lewises that are still alive, and channeling my pain and anger into peace and action. Our programs and services are grounded in the Center for Disease Control social ecological framework that intervention are needed at multiple levels in order to interrupt cycles of violence. First, at the family level, this is the heart of our work. Our Survivors Outreach Services provides emotional and practical support for families in the first 24 to 72 hours after a homicide happens, and ongoing advocacy, using the step-by-step burial resource guide as our tool. Our Intergenerational Justice Program provides coordinated support and guidance to families of murdered victims and families of people arrested and incarcerated for murder in order to create opportunities for healing, reconciliation, and accountability. Our leadership academies are workshops for families on both sides of homicides that focus on how to navigate the complexity of the criminal justice system, access needed resources, and advocate for themselves, their families, and their community. Our Rest in Peace Fund provides financial assistance to survivors of homicide victims who are unable to pay for upfront burial costs. You see, cemeteries do not have layaway nor payment plan, and they want their money right away. At the community level, we've developed programs for incarcerated people at Plymouth County Correctional Facilities, our teachers, and our white allies in the suburbs. At the society level, we have made a significant impact. We convene the Massachusetts Survivors of Homicide Networks. We coordinate the Survivors of Homicide Victims Providers Network, and we lead the Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month, which is a law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from November 20th to December 20th. And many of you have probably walked in our annual Mother's Day Walk for Peace. This is our annual fundraiser that sustains our Center of Healing, Teaching, and Learning in the urban settings. We are launching our Training and Technical Assistance Center, and you are the first to hear about it, to equip public health, public safety, institutional stakeholders, and religious leaders with the tools needed to respond and serve families impacted by murder equitably and effectively, regardless of the circumstances. I will now take this time to introduce you to one of the specific tools called Peace Play in urban settings. Peace play is an effective practice for families impacted by trauma, grief, and loss, who sometimes struggles to put words to what we've been through. Research tells us that language is not always easily accessible to survivors in the aftermath of trauma. Playing in the sand is a way for us to pause, reflect without the pressure of finding the right words. Now, have you heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Creating images in the sand helps us to express ourselves, even when we don't know the words. Peace play is a healing technique using miniature objects that are invested with symbolic content by the builder or the client. The builder puts the object in the tray of sand such that the tray takes on a characteristic of a world. By playing with these objects or miniatures symbolically in the sand, that which is painful or fearful from the participant or the client becomes something which is able to be played with and shifted over time to create new visions and a sense of healing and hope. I first heard of this modality from one of my spiritual advisors, Reverend Michelle Walsh. She invited me to attend a training at the Arlington Community Center for Professionals working in communities impacted by violence. I participated in that training with more than 1,000 social workers and religious leaders. I was a professional who worked in communities impacted by violence. I am a Black Latina woman living in communities affected by violence, and a Black Latina mother who has been personally impacted by violence. Yet, as I watched the room, I wonder why this practice was not available in my community that's impacted by violence. And I wonder, why did none of the practitioners in the room look like me? Yet, I was welcomed with open arms, and I tried it on. This practice resonated with me. I needed something that spoke to my spirit and within my culture. I needed a tool to help me process the victim-offender dialogue I went through with Charles Bogues, the man convicted of killing Lewis. Although I had one of my spiritual advisor, Dr. Reverend Lisette Wright, who attended that meeting with me, there weren't any therapists or counselors that were equipped to guide me through that process because, you see, I had no words for it. It happened. I had no words for it. I leaned on Reverend Walsh to lead me through play. Peace play in urban setting was birthed from my experience. And I'm going to use this time that I have left to give you a glimpse into my process. Right here, right now, is the first time I am sharing this process publicly, so bear with me. This is the world that I built after I met with Charles Bogues in 2010. I took the photos and also made a recording of my reflections on how I interpreted the world. This process was incredibly powerful. I was drawn to use the children's figures as you see, their innocence, their sense of wonder, their curiosity. I realized through my playing in the sand that Charles Bogues was trying to show me his humanity. He was trying to show me his heart. And I was reminded in that moment in the sand that he too was once a child. It is so easy for us to forget that people have hearts in the midst of pain and suffering. And here's what I said during my reflections. We're living in a society where all of our hearts have been broken in one way or another. You see, I needed to know what happened to the light, and that's the candle that you see there, of the children who grow up to hurt others. After playing in the sand, there is still a spark of light in the midst of pain and suffering he has caused. I was asked by Reverend Michelle Walsh, Tina, tell me about the woman that's blocked by the three-headed monster with red eyes. I responded, she wasn't ready to turn around. She's stuck, and she's stubborn, and she's okay being stuck. She's not in any rush. She doesn't want to see what's behind her. She's seeing the enormity of everything she's been through and how far she's traveled, and she's not taking it lightly. She just did it because it needed to be done, and it was the right thing to do. It isn't bad being stuck, she said. She pauses, and then she reflects in the mirror, and she says, I don't want to be stuck anymore. She's choosing to be still. She wants to be seen. She doesn't want to hide anymore. She's where she needs to be, right here, right now. This is what I love about Peace Play. As the client, I am in control. I can look at what I'm doing and feeling without judgment. I can acknowledge and accept what is happening in the moment without knowing what I will do next. I can recognize where I've been and what I've seen, and I can embrace all of the complicated feelings that come with it, even the feeling of thirst for revenge. And I can also change my mind from being stuck to being still. I can walk around my tray and see things from different perspectives. Peace Play is what I needed to process the victim-offender dialogue and to clearly see God's justice and will for my own inner healing. Then I would be equipped to deal with the dreaded parole process and prepare my family and Lewis's friends for Charles' re-entry back into our community. We share Peace Play with others who are ready to travel this deep and personal journey or path to navigate their own spiritual journey towards healing. Peace Play has helped me to clarify my purpose when I feel lost, burdened, alone, and when I feel stuck. There's yet another loss after the murder of a child. After my husband decided he did not want to be married to me anymore, I thought that I could not take anymore and that this was the end of life as I knew it. The rage and the sense of betrayal that I felt was beyond words, and there was no one that was around that could guide us through this process. We were the perfect couple. Our son was murdered, and we were thrust into the public's eyes for others to teach peace. Being married, yet not knowing and understanding how to heal our brokenness. I did some research, and I found that 70 to 85% of families end up divorced or separated after the murder or death of a child. So I went searching what happened to the other 25%. How did they make it? Who was there for them? What was that magic pills? Silence, no answer. The feeling of shame and embarrassment that comes with divorce is unexplainable. And there was no one who was able to guide me. In my tray, I am not alone. In the midst of all that was going wrong, there was a sense that there is nowhere else to go. No matter what you do, more suffering will come and you will be stuck. Today, I am well aware that God has had a plan for me, yet it comes at a very high price. The woman sits alone in the center, yet she rests and she trusts God. And the tow truck that you see on the side is there to get her unstuck so that she can fulfill her plans that God has prepared for her. I've been a woman of faith since a little girl. I was baptized Methodist. I practiced Catholicism all my life. I found joy at Temple Abodah in Newton, and I enjoy a good Baptist revival. Healing after Lewis's murder required me to renew my faith in my God, a faith in God's peace, not man's peace. Peace Play has helped me to reflect on the message I get from God and trust that I have what it takes to fulfill His will. This is the image of my recent Sand Peace Play, and this happened last Thursday. After 23 years of being president of the Peace Institute, would you believe that I still have work and healing to do? I used the passage from Micah to guide me on my journey. Whenever I want to give up and go lay on the beach somewhere to eat bonbons and drink margaritas, I'm going to do that someday, but not yet. My struggle, what else do you want from me, God? Murder continues to happen right here in our own backyard. 2017, already newly bereaved families added to the growing list of survivors. So He guided me to Micah 6:8. Here is my reflection from the most recent trade. The open hands remind me I am embracing 2017 with open arms, open hearts, and open mind. The hand, even though broken, is God in the midst of it, and I am equipped. I had to be broken before I could be built up to do God's will. You see, I've learned that God will use the least of us. And in this sense, I am honored to be considered the least, to show His peace and His power, and to find our purpose. The woman clergy is God's plan for me. Lord, I can't believe I'm saying that out loud. The hand in the back of her is God's hand saying, I've got you, even if you fall. I'm here to support you. And the mirror in the shape of a footprint is a reminder that when it feels that I'm too tired to take another steps, or that things seem to be stuck, it is God that has carried me for the past 23 years. Survived by the murder of my oldest son and survived a divorce, until death do us part has a whole new meaning for me. This is who I am. This is what I'm called to be, a minister of peace, God's peace, reflected through the 7 principles of peace: love, unity, faith, hope, courage, and forgiveness. God's peace in the midst of pain. I am called to minister to couples who are dealing with the death of a child. I am called to minister to broken hearts. I am called to teach God's peace in a world that's focused on man's peace. I am no longer afraid. On this day, I surrender to God's will for my life. I am here, Lord. In closing, we all have the ability to heal ourselves. Peace Play has affirmed my faith in God, my faith in myself, and my faith in my community. I know that we all have the innate ability to heal ourselves and to hear what God wants from us. The Peace Institute has been busy facilitating Peace Play and bringing this ministry to many members of our community locally, statewide, and nationally. Here is Peace Play in action at the Massachusetts Survivors of Homicide Victims Luncheon at Lombardo. Peace Play in our community, Peace PQ. We used a die-in tray so that participants could create a vision of a more peaceful community. Peace Play at our Survivors of Homicide Victims Providers Network. It's a powerful tool to ensure that the providers stay connected with their purpose and it prevents burnout. Peace Play for our white allies who also help heal the hurt and the rift between communities and agencies, and it inspires the kind of reflection that can lead to more authentic relationship. The benefits of Peace Play. Research tells us I also learned to like researchers. Fantasy play. Human has a need and desire for play, for free their creativity and their inner feelings, perceptions and memories to bring them into outer reality. And it provides the opportunity for the client or the builder to move from victim to victor and from crisis to creator. This is my personal and professional and practical perspective, guided by my spiritual experience and God peace, reflective through the principles of peace. So 23 years later, we introduce you to the Training and Technical Assistant Center. Reverend Wayne Sylvester Daly is our coordinator. We have set up a table outside, and during the reception, we invite all of you to try on Peace Play and to think about how you might incorporate this new modality into your toolkit with the organization you run, the families you serve, the congregation you pastor, the students you teach, and in your family. Sign up to support legislation on amending the state victim compensation that will directly impact families whose loved ones have been murdered. It's still an invitation. Sign up your team for the Mother's Day Walk for Peace and help us reach our goal of $400,000 to sustain the Center of Healing, Teaching, and Learning in urban settings. Take us on as a research project and evaluate Peace Play in urban setting. To learn more of the Survivor-Centered Trauma-Informed Methodology, again, Reverend Wayne Sylvester Daly will be here to guide you and to answer any questions you may have. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I leave you in God's peace.
Thank you. And now we'll ask Monalisa to join us. Monalisa Smith, Mothers for Justice and Equality.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So, as you heard, my name is Monalisa Smith, and I was not named after the song. I was not named after the painting. I was named after the song. So, throughout my my growing up, everyone would say, "Show me that picture of that person," and I would say, "That looks nothing like me." And then I finally asked my mother, you know, why did you name me that? And she said, "You don't like your name?" I said, "Well, it's not that I don't like my name, it's that picture don't look like me." And she said, "You were named after the song." So I just wanted to share that with you to lighten us up a little bit before I get started. You know, I am so thankful for my sister and my friend and inspiration, Tina Chéry. You know, you gotta give her another round of applause, right? You gotta recognize excellence and leadership and courage and conviction when it's in your presence. You have to recognize the gift that we all have. And so I thank her because, you know, she's an inspiration. And, you know, it's not an easy road to travel. And I remember her saying often that it wasn't a club that I wanted to be in. It was a club that, you know, I just happened to be the one that started. So I had to join your club, and I didn't ask for it either, Tina. And I'm sure there's many of us here that joined your club too, and we didn't ask for it either. But through the grace of God, through God's perfect grace, we turned what the devil meant for evil into a victory. And you led the way, so we thank you for that. So I have to recognize the inspiration that's with me today, right? The women of Mothers for Justice and Equality, you know, young women, women who have lost children to violence, women who have led causes, women who come out today and support this work. And I just want you to stand up so we can properly salute you for your bravery and your courage. I believe that there are a lot of Tina Cherys in this world. I believe there are women all over this country children who have been snatched from them, whose souls have been broken to the core, whose hearts just don't know how they're going to mend, who wake up one day and say, how does tomorrow come? But I believe that they were given this very special gift when they were conceived into their mother's womb, Reverend Walker. I believe that when God birthed them and placed them into the womb of he gave them a gift. And I believe life hid that gift, and that pain helps to bring it forth. And so in the work that we're doing, Mothers for Justice and Equality, our work is to really begin to work with those women who are broken to the core. Those women who recognize that, I may have lost something very precious to me. I may be incarcerated. I may have took the wrong turn in life, and life didn't turn out the way I had hoped it to be, but there's something else that's calling me. Our work is to help to transform them into the leaders and the change makers that they are ordained to be. And I do say ordained because I believe that their pain, it has a purpose. And I believe that they have a purpose in this life. So over the next, I think I have 15 minutes. I might have 10 now. But over the time that I have, I wanted to just share with you a little bit about myself and also the work that Mothers for Justice and Equality is doing and the impact that we are having, on this issue, right? And also, I just want to share with you, just some of the work that we have in front of us. So I want to start with just telling you that, I was a banker, right? And I enjoyed the job that I had as a banker, right? I worked very hard to be an executive at a bank. And then I got a call in the night that my nephew was murdered. And I showed up on the scene, and on that scene was the yellow tape, and behind that scene was my nephew, and my niece was there, and she was saying, my son, that's my son. And it was a very cold night, not just weather-wise, right? It was cold because it was so procedural. And so we went to the emergency room, and they said that, he didn't make it. And so I sat there and I watched, this pain and this agony, this pain that was just beyond any comprehension. And all I could do was ask myself, how does tomorrow happen? The next day I returned to work, and I didn't want to talk about it because it wasn't that I was embarrassed about it, but it was so much pain that became my sanctuary. And so I would tell, my friends that at work that, I just really don't want to talk about it. But I realized through time that I needed to talk about it, that I needed to share my story so others would understand the impact of violence. I also realized something in that time is that my reality and destiny had collided, and that my purpose was born. That it was time for me to move from being the banker, and it was time for me to move into another place. And I didn't want to. I was more than willing to work behind the scenes, and I was willing to do whatever I needed to do, but I did not want to be in the front of this. And so, but when it's your call, when it's your time, you have to make a choice. You're either going to answer or you're going to die there. And so I answered, and I organized women who I knew had the answers in them. I knew that if we were going to come up with solutions to violence, I had to go where the problem was. See, I learned that in banking, right? That if you want to solve the solution, you got to go to the experts and get the answers. So we founded together Mothers for Justice and Equality. So Who are we? Who are we? We are mothers, we are daughters, we are sisters, we are brothers, we are fathers, we are clergy, we are women who lead nonprofit organizations, we are individuals who have lost children to violence, who have experienced violence, who have been affected by the violence. Why now? How could we ask ourselves that question, right? Look at Chicago. Look at Detroit. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Baltimore. Look at Boston. Look at the carnage, the number of lives that are being taken from us. Who would have imagined we would read about 2-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds being murdered on the street? Why not now? It's now or never. It's time for us to take a position that change happens with us. What do we believe? We believe that change happens with us. That if we're going to see true change, that we have to educate ourselves, we have to empower ourselves, we have to engage the experts that are on the field working day and night, and we have to begin to form partnerships and strategies together in order to see the change that we need to see. What's the problem, right? We all talk about the problem, and we all know the problem, and I really feel like I'm preaching to preachers. But the problem is that the violence is very concentrated in small communities within large cities. Communities with high unemployment, communities with high incarceration, communities where students have low academic performance, communities where there's low graduation rates, communities where we lack the necessary resources to change those dynamics. They're melting pots. They breed violence. And those are the places that we need to see the change begin to happen. In Boston, and I know that Tina and her team and Reverend Walker and John Brown will agree that the homicide is concentrated in the neighborhoods of Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain. Neighborhoods that have high incarceration, high unemployment, low academic performance, and that violence continues because, as Tina was sharing with us, we don't treat the problem, right? We don't treat the trauma, right? And so what happens is we have victims become perpetrators. And we have the perpetrators who become the victims. And we have families, when their children are released from incarceration, they're not given any services. They're not given any job. We have programs where families live in these areas, and they have what's called HUD housing, which is a federal housing program, and it doesn't allow for their children to come home. The mothers have to decide whether or not I'm going to stay in the house with my other children, or I'm going to leave so that my son or daughter is not alone out there in the world. So where do they go, right? Where would you go? If you were serving time and then you were released and your mother, you knew that if you went home, your family had to make this decision, where would you go, right? You would go back to what you knew. You would go back to the gang, who was your family. You would go back to the crime that you had to commit to survive. So this problem just continues to escalate in our communities. Our approach is through education engagement. That's the approach that Mothers for Justice and Equality takes in solving the problem. We believe empowered and engaged mothers and youth working together with civic leaders, law enforcement, are key to ending violence. Why do I say that? Because they're the experts. You are all academic professionals. You all understand that we have to go to people who understand the violence in order to develop the solutions to that violence. If we can train them to interact with law enforcement, with civic leaders, then we can begin to get them to open up to what is happening in my home, what is happening with my son or daughter, and we can head off that violence. We can begin to head off those changes that are happening in the family. But we have to come to that place where we begin to not just say to the mother, the daughter, the son, that we want you to participate in this discussion. We have to train them how to have a voice, how to be effective in that conversation, how to be able to turn, their situation into a solution. The education. We empower mothers and youth by providing civic leadership tools needed to take action and make the change. We have personal leadership training classes that go from 4 to 8 weeks. The women that you see here are peer leaders who have taken the class, who have come in one way, and now they're leading change in a whole nother way. Peer-to-peer mentoring. That's the work we're doing behind the walls with women and men in South Bay, right? We are taking individuals who have experienced incarceration, who know what it's like, and when those young moms re-enter, there's no better mentor than the one that has been through what they did, right? Who better do you want to help you prepare your life plan than somebody that can relate to your situation and overcome her, right? If I'm a mother that's lost someone to violence and I have this yearning that I'm supposed to do more with that pain, who am I going to call? I'm going to call Tina Chéry, right? I want to know how you did it, right? And so peer-to-peer is a powerful model that we have to begin to use. Workforce readiness. If I can preach to you all day long, but if I can't help you get a job, then what does that do? Right? It just goes in one ear, out the other, right? We have to teach people how to rebuild their lives, how to restore, that confidence in themselves. Financial education. Poverty is the root cause of violence. We need to start talking to people about personal financial planning, right? We begin to teach you about having a vision for, you may not have a net worth today, but if you prepare the budget, if you set some goals for yourself, in 5 years, a net worth becomes your reality, right? Taking people from the bottom up where they deserve to be. Public speaking, using your voice to change the hearts of lawmakers, leaders, people who can change laws and legislation, using those stories to touch their hearts. Second chance. People who are behind the walls, people who made a mistake truly deserve a second chance. And we work with women and men on helping them to develop plans. When they re-enter into their communities, they truly have a second chance. Engagement. After we've trained and we've educated individuals, many of these women, they want to get out and really show that they are leaders in their communities and restore that hope back to their communities. We have mom cafes, we do peace rallies, we do town hall meetings, and voter registration. Just to give you an idea of this whole kind of logic, a woman comes into Mothers for Justice and Equality, takes our peer leadership training, develops a vision board, a personal action plan. She becomes a peer-to-peer mentor. She starts to do more workforce readiness, and she continues her education in peer leader. We took our work a step further and went to the Department of Transition Assistance, that used to be known as welfare, and we began to talk to them because we knew that this is the final phase of welfare reform. This is it, right? And that means that many women and men and young people who are receiving those benefits, 2 years, that's the max. If you don't get a job, if you don't get a trade, if you don't do something, then your cash benefits are gone. They say you can still keep your food stamps. You can still keep your child care. But what happens if you did not get any trade? So we began to get our program qualified as those hours And so that we can begin to work with those women so that they could get a job and that they will not be left behind when change knocks on their door. The impact that we're having in our adult program, you can see we started the training in 2013, and you can see how those numbers have escalated over time. We operate our programs in the public schools. We go into institutions where the people are. We don't just let them come to us, we go to them, right? We work with churches, we work with schools, we work in prisons. And I know this is a lot of words on the slides. My staff told me that this morning, but so I won't read it. But you can see the impact that we are having in our programs. I'll give you a minute to read it. The youth program, you can see, yes, we work with youth, right? If we're going to see an end to violence, if we're going to transform our communities, we have to work with young people. And they are the future for all of us. And you can see we started our program in 2013, and now we have upwards, we're serving over 120 youth, and we serve them in the schools and behind the walls. And you can see the impact of our youth program, and these are young people who are graduating. We're measuring their self-esteem. And some of the highlights for our work, voter registration. This year, we registered 600 individuals to vote. And we also tracked them to make sure they went to the polls. Parent-police partnerships, so important for us to engage our law enforcement. We were very proud to work with John Brown. We were very proud to work with Teen Empowerment. Charles Hamilton Institute, has been such an advocate for us, and Reverend Liz Walker. Oh my goodness, I can go on and on and on about the support and encouragement that we have gotten along the way. We convened a panel of women of color leading change in Boston, brought together legislative leaders, and began to have a conversation about how they became into their positions. So these mothers, these women who are transforming their lives got to see that you too could be a state rep. You too could be the president of the city council, right? There are no limits on what you can do. And these are some photos from our national conference that I would love to share with you. It's not okay. That's our motto. That's our motto. Where did it come from, right? So many times, and I'm sure Tina can tell you, that for some reason, people think that it just goes away, right? They think that you get better. Well, I'm here to tell you that you never get better, that it does not go away. And if people say, are you okay? You're going to say, it will never be okay. It will never be okay. And I am a woman of faith. I truly believe that, we have to accept things. But you know what? Today, God is my witness. I cannot accept the fact that my nephew's life was taken at 18 years old. And I have dedicated my entire life, everything within me, into ensuring that no other mother, aunt, daughter will go through what I went through. And I will work tirelessly until that happens, because it will never, ever be okay for me. And so with that, we developed a book of reflections that is mothers sharing their stories, because we believe writing is so important. It's a way of healing. And I am going to conclude with reading a reflection to you, if that's okay with you. And it's called Some Days and Other Days. Some days I feel like the world belongs to me, and sky is the limit. I find myself singing songs of hope and victory. I find myself glowing in front of strangers. I find myself believing that I am beautiful and loved by someone special. I am unstoppable. In my mind, I feel the warmth of the sun shining on my face. I find myself sitting peacefully near a beautiful oak tree in front of a reflection lake. The sound of the soft winds blowing sounds like whispers in my ear. I hear poems of love, peace being spoken to me. The soft winds feel like a soft touch that caresses against my body. I am in total peace, as if I am floating above the clouds and no one can see me or feel me. It's just me and the universe with no such thing as time. It's endless. There's no beginning and there's no end to the love, peace, and tranquility I am feeling. It's my Creator and me together at last. Suddenly, I'm awakened to a loud noise. It sounds like sirens moving toward me. It sounds like every other day, a place where I live and work, a place with loud noise, anxiety, and fear. The noise of the sirens stop. It's followed by a voice of pain and fear crying out for mercy. The soft winds I felt on my face that caressed my body have turned into strong, stormy winds that are whipping against my skin. My glow is no more. It's been replaced with complete horror. My heart is broken again, and I am yearning for my some days to return and my other days to go away forever. They are becoming too much for me to bear. My heart, my body, my soul desires more some days and less every other day. Thank you.
Let me start by just thanking the presenters that have come before me. It's really overwhelming, actually, following all that great work that both Tina and Monalisa talked about. And we have worked together over many years, and I actually remember when Tina's son was killed in 1993, that was around the time that teen empowerment began. And back in those days, murder of young people, between young people, was just unbelievably common. So one of the things to recognize is that there has been a lot of progress made in Boston. And in many, many ways, Boston is a model city. Because people like Tina and Monalisa and many others have gotten involved, and they weren't defeated by the traumas that they faced. They kind of pulled themselves together and went to work, and as Monalisa said, to do the work so that other people don't have to suffer from that pain. And in that, there's a way to heal your own pain as well. So what Teen Empowerment is a program that is working on the big picture, okay? What we're trying to do is to change the overall sort of social environment, the cultural environment. What is the kind of spiritual health of the community overall? And we try to take care of that on a really on-the-ground kind of level. So what we're looking to do is to change the patterns of behavior by having an impact on the value systems and the belief systems of youth and of adults, with the goal of changing those patterns of behavior so that there are less murders, less other kinds of dysfunctional behavior. And the other piece of it is there's a whole lot more positive things going on, a lot more positive outcomes for young people and their families. A fundamental belief of teen empowerment, and one of the things that we base on, is that young people are a human and spiritual resource. So we look at young people and we see there's lots of problems and there's lots of challenges, and what that does is it obliterates what they can contribute. And when you're talking about youth violence, the most important people to be involved in reducing youth violence, in changing the culture of youth, are youth themselves. And what Teen Empowerment tries to do is to impact what youth say and do with each other when adults are not around. So that's sort of a basics of our approach. Is this ready now?
I think it's ready.
So, round of applause for the technical people. Yay! Where would we be without them? Be impossible. I'd be here all night looking for that cursor, and I'd probably be cursing. So what we do is we hire and we train young people to take on positions of leadership. They analyze their community. They figure out what the most important issues are in their community. They then develop a strategy, and they implement that strategy to have an impact on the value systems, belief systems of their peers, changing patterns of behavior. it's very important who we hire, how we hire them, how we train them. There's a whole set of things that we're going to try to go through a little bit of tonight. A way we are setting this up is I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do what we do, and both John Brown, who is the what is it, John? You're the sergeant detective? Yeah, I'll get that right. Anyway, he's going to talk about it from the police standpoint, and Tay, who is here with us, he's a youth organizer, and he'll talk about it from his perspective. So I think one of the best ways to take a look at what we do is to take a look at what we do, and that would be through this video. We had CBS News spend 2 days with us about 3 weeks ago, and this was on the morning news show.
Our series, A More Perfect Union, continues this morning to showcase how what unites us as Americans is far greater than what divides us. Today, we look at Boston. Despite having a history of racial tension, the city has avoided crises like we've seen in other places from Ferguson to Baltimore and Dallas. Michelle Miller went to Boston to learn how its police and young people are finding common ground. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning. Well, when the Center for Teen Empowerment moved into the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston about 7 years ago, gang and gun violence was widespread. Dorchester still struggles with crime, but youth there are now part of the solution. Dante Amoragvi says he's been stopped by police hundreds of times, but he's never been arrested.
I stand here in front of you guys not as a suspect, but as a leader.
A youth leader for the nonprofit Teen Empowerment. It brings together teens and police in Boston to talk.
It's a tough time for police and the community relations right now in America. It's not a secret.
They engage in some pretty non-traditional ways. It's disarming for both sides.
Really having them stand in each other's shoes. And they see someone who maybe is exactly like them, who faces the exact same challenges.
Stanley Pollack founded the program in 1992 when violent crime was rampant in Boston. It gathered gang members, sworn enemies, and brokered a peace deal.
You get them into a room, and you have them talk. You have them sit there and look at what the fight is really about.
In the mid-90s, for 29 months, not a single person under the age of 21 was killed on the streets.
One of the things that took place was there was a real belief in young people, and there was an investment in young people as leaders, and paid them for their work to make their community peaceful.
From 2015 to 2016, in the parts of the city where the program operates, homicides have remained flat. But throughout Boston, homicides went up 36%. Pollack sees these teens as the agents of change.
It begins not because they have a problem, but because they have something to offer.
They're paid to organize events and recruit new members, including police officers like Zach Crossan.
It's middle of summer, it's hot out, you get the hoodie on.
He met Dante in the park this summer. It was a case of mistaken identity.
In my mind, I'm thinking, we're in a neighborhood where there's been some recent shooting activity.
Were you worried about stereotyping
No.
this young man?
No. I get it. I'm not naive to understand. I know I'm a white police officer in a predominantly minority neighborhood, and that's a huge thing to overcome.
But they did. And from the other side of the fence, Dante handed Officer Zach a flyer.
And do you normally just whip out teen empowerment flyers when you see police officers?
I do now.
A wall this high could have been a real barrier for you two.
Absolutely, and I'm glad it wasn't.
There was a time when things might have gone very differently for Dante.
You had dropped out of school, you were homeless, you were considering selling drugs. What stopped you?
There's no love in these streets, you know. It's only two ways. It's either die or go to jail.
But there's a third choice you made.
The change.
It's been a tough life for you.
Real tough.
Dante is now back at school, working to graduate this spring. But he and Officer Zach are not naive. The faces of dead, unarmed black males killed by police and men in blue killed on the job run through their minds every day.
I want to go home to my family just as much as anybody else wants to go home to theirs.
Still, what's happening here is what they believe has freed Boston from the fate of so many other cities.
Like how me and Zach are, how I can, sit down and have a conversation with an officer, if there happens to be a time where I have to be stopped, it's not going to be that hostility because, okay, that's Dante, we on common ground.
Dante is technically homeless. He is staying with friends, and with the help of Team Empowerment, he hopes to be independent soon. He also dreams of becoming a social worker one day because he says so many social workers have helped him through his tough times.
Yeah, I love this story. The Attorney General said something to me interesting once. She said that the problem is that most people meet a cop for the first time on a negative basis, right? You get a ticket or you're pulled over or something. And the first time you meet a cop should be on a positive basis. That community support should begin way before there's any sort of problem to build that level of trust.
Right. And what's happening here is that teens are truly involved in changing the face of their communities and changing the attitudes of their communities. And the other end is that some are getting paid for it, like Dante. I mean,
also, it's a perfect example of how you change things one by one, one-on-one.
Yeah.
When you get to know people's human beings, works every time.
It sure does.
We have a lot in common when we start talking to each other.
Yeah.
It's really great, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot in that video, and really I wish you all could have been there for that meeting that we had. So that was a 2-hour session, a 2-hour dialogue. It was probably over 2 hours. It was like about 2.5 hours, and it was one of the most intensely positive interactions I've ever seen between police and youth. They take these little tiny snippets of it. I begged them for the tape. They wouldn't give it to me because, the whole country needs to see it, right? There's these barriers that are up, and it's our attention, right? What is our intention, and where do we pay attention, and where do we put resources really determines a lot of what the outcomes are going to be. So if we see youth as the enemy, we build up a force to repress that enemy, to capture that enemy. That's what we're going to have. And if we put the resources on the other end of the equation, every police officer should have that as a requirement, that they sit down with young people, that they get to know young people. One of the moderators said, you should meet a police officer for the first time in a positive environment, not in a negative environment, and almost nobody does. So that's really a restructuring of the culture of the police department. We want changes in the culture of what youth do, and we need changes in the culture of what police do. And it's very powerful. And we've been doing this not for just a couple months. We've been doing this for 25 years. We've been doing this. We've always recognized that that was an important thing. There's a couple things that are really important about the way we do that. Police and youth come together as equals. It's not a session where police are going to talk with youth about what they should do and how they should behave and so forth and so on. It's a session where they connect as equals and come together and know each other as human beings. And the other aspect of it is that and I know you saw the people kind of doing funny things and running around the room and all that kind of stuff. And those are funny games, but those are so much more than that. The book, Moving Beyond Icebreakers, which is mentioned in my introduction of my last 80 years of work, explains what the depth of those interactive exercises. If we just come together in the ways we always do, there's just so much more there. Right now, we're in this room and everybody's in their little space, and we're just not going to get below, just kind of looking at each other, which is actually misleading because it's the surface, and everybody's so much deeper than that. Everybody is so much deeper than we can see from the surface. So what we've developed is some mechanisms to get underneath the surface, and that is the use of these interactive exercises that are extremely powerful. I'm going to show you one right now, so we'll get a little below the surface. This is called stand up, sit down, but I don't think you can stand up too well in these rows, right? Is it possible to stand up? Yeah? You can do that? Samantha? Is that your technical understanding? Wow, Stephanie, you did that really well. Okay, so they tell me that you can stand up, so you're going to have to do it. But if it doesn't work, it's Stephanie and Samantha who decided that that's the way it was going to be. So, if you don't feel like you want to stand up, you can raise your hand. So I'm going to ask you a question. If the question refers to you, Please stand up. So please stand up if you went to bed before midnight last night. Oh, those are the perky ones. Okay, you can have a seat. Stand up if you went to bed after 1 a.m. last night. And still at it. That's good. Okay. Stand up if you grew up in the country. Oh, good. All right. Stand up if you grew up in the suburbs. Suburban folks. Yay, suburban people. Okay. And stand up if you city, what you consider to be the city. Great. All right. Stand up if you play a musical instrument. Wow, let's jam. Yeah. All right. Stand up if you've made a speech in front of more than 100 people. More than 200 people. More than 500 people. More than 1,000 people. More than 1,000,000 people. I know, I got you. Actually, one time I did that and somebody stood up. Yeah, they were a beauty queen. They literally were. They were a beauty queen. Stand up if you've been on the local or national news. Great, thank you. Stand up if you've traveled outside of the country. Great. Stand up if you know someone who's been a victim of violence. Thank you. Stand up if you are willing to work to ensure the dignity of all people. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, you can be seated. So in that exercise, first of all, in the exercise, it just mixes us up a little bit, okay? We've been sitting here a long time. At least we got a little bit of blood flowing and that sort of thing. You can look around, you can see there's some things that we have in common and there's some things that are different about us, right? We're all kind of struggling with some of the basics, getting sleep and taking care of ourselves. And some people grow up in the country, some in the city and so forth. Some people have had incredible opportunities, right, for experiences and development, and other people have had a lot less. And what teen empowerment is trying to do is to provide the young people in the inner city with the opportunity for them to discover their talents, to be able to really practice and develop those talents, and to use their leadership skills. And we do that not as, it is very good for them. It's really good for them. Young people come into our program and they really develop, and they develop very quickly. But we don't do it solely for the good of the young people. Here's the real sincere belief that the young people can really solve these problems. And we've seen it over and over again. And if the society will invest in those young people, they will return those investments in such a big way. Sometimes I know we all, now are in this struggle nationally to recapture our country. And that's a struggle that we really must win. We're here in Massachusetts, and we're privileged to be here in Massachusetts with so many progressive people. And we are a model, and we need to continue to do that. And one of the aspects of that, very important aspect of that, is the understanding of how important it is to not see teenagers as children. They are not children. They're not big children. They are young adults, and they are ready to contribute. And we need to understand that and invest in it. So with that, let me introduce Tay, who will come here and talk a little bit about his experience, and then John will come up, and then I'll come back and do a quick wrap-up, and we'll be all set. Thank you.
First off, I would like to thank you guys for accepting me into your very precious school. I really feel blessed to be here. Anyways, hi, my name is Tay. I'm 17 years old. I'm a junior at Boston Community Leadership Academy, BCLA, in Hyde Park, Boston. For the past 3 months, I've been working as a youth organizer here at Teen Empowerment. And just like as my coworker Dante, I grew up a witness of gangs, violence, and guns in my community. As growing up, I would see my friends, my older brother, and my older brother's friends carry guns walking in the street. Them carrying guns, it made it seem like, oh, this is okay. This is what to do. So I started carrying guns. Started walking around carrying guns. Started walking around just doing drugs. By drugs, I meant smoking weed. no other drugs. Anyways, and yeah, and I just like thought like I'm thinking like, hey, this lifestyle is pretty cool. Like hey, this is what I want to grow up to be. I want to grow up just smoking weed, gang banging. This is the way to live. I'm gonna find a way to live like this. And just like everything kind of hit me all at once when my older brother passed away due to gang violence in the streets. He was shot and killed in South End in the summer of 2014. To find out that like I would never be able to talk to my older brother or see him anymore, especially I actually looked up to him as a role model, like it really hurt me. Like, I don't know, just something in my heart snapped. And it's like me being as a youth, like me being as a young individual, I was still blinded by ignorance. So I like, in me, I decided like, do I want to act out on revenge? Or do I want to act on change and try to help prevent this, from happening to any of my friends and people that I love? So when I started working for teen empowerment, they really gave me ideas and ways to help try to change my community. My fault, I'm sorry. Since I got hired, I met with many of Boston's finest police officers, including, well, now I got to meet Sergeant Garrett. Thank you. I got to hold 2 dialogues with the police where we sit down and we conversate about issues that's going on within our community, and we plan on like conversating ideas on how we can like try to solve these issues. And one idea that came up was, in a sense, it was by connections. Connections and building relationships really do change people. Instead of just seeing somebody from the outside as like what they are, or if you actually take down and talk to them and see like their true value, you never know what they might know. For all you know, I could be a killer right now, just walking for free. Or I could be the president's son. Nobody knows. But I think y'all know I'm not the president's son. Also for my job, we also host many little events in the community. So we try, including like youth and adults, so we can like, as we say, like try to bring this connection and like try to build bonds within our community. And by community, I also mean police officers too, because police officers are part of our community, not my community, our community, and we need to realize that too. I've also been to several public hearings, considered on the ballot of no on question number 2, and like being on like these little hearings, I got to witness and hear so much of like what people got to say about our community, and like that really like just motivates me to like help try to be an advocate for our youth to change this. Because I have like Stanley said, well, many adults don't listen to youth. We're like, they see it as ignorance, or that we're not mature enough to really know the detail about things. But there's a lot of many youth that know the details about things that's going on out here. And I feel like we need to have more dialogues like this where we can express that. And out of everything I've just been doing, I feel like I'm on the right path to success. From coming off just gang banging. Thank you. From like coming off as like a gangbanger, just running the streets with no type of motivation, to like being a positive change in the community and actually working to make a change. Like it really feels good to like say that and get to say it in front of all you people. Well, I'm sorry, I meant all you people, young adults. And now I'm just working on trying to improve my community, and I feel like really listen down to what everybody came up here to say about how like we need to work with more dialogues against our youth, with women, because they change and like talk. It really does help. Building bonds and relationships with people really do help. It helped me, it changed me the way I was. Now my future goal is to be a social worker too. I want to be sort of like a therapist, so I can help like motivate young kids that was like me in the past, that's still lost in the streets. I want to help be that change for them. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Tay. Great job. For those of you who said you were in bed before midnight last night, we'll stand by because I got a lot of things to say. So we're going to be here for a while, all right? No, I'm just kidding. I'll try to be as brief as I can. I do have an awful lot of things in my head, as you can imagine, being one of the last speakers to go here and having covered so many different issues that have been very, very close to my heart and have really impacted my life, not only professionally, but personally, as well as my own family. I'm a resident of the city of Boston. I came here when I left the Marine Corps in 1993. I've been a police officer since 1995. Some of those videos that you've seen about the youth, teen empowerment and the gang unit and all those things, the older videos is where I would have been. So I don't think Tay was even born when I did my first bag toss interactive over on Rutland Street in the South End. So just briefly to cover some of the things about teen empowerment relative to what I've seen over the years, my 22 years with this job now. I believe that my car, when I was in the gang unit, we used to ride around 4 deep, right? So I think my car was one of the first cars from the gang unit to actually participate in teen empowerment in the South End back in like 95, 96. So as you can imagine, you know, being in the gang unit is kind of a rough, tough job, right? You get involved in a lot of different things, right? You're rolling around with people with guns, you're getting all these kinds of injuries, you're running up and down stairs, going to offenses, doing all these different things. So when I told my partners that we were going to go to the South End, we were going to go to a thing called teen empowerment, and we were going to interact with these youth, you can imagine the feedback that I got from police officers who've been on the job for a very long time. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to get them there. We get through the door, we did some of these interactive things, bag toss, concentric circles, some other different things. By the end of the period, the guy who was the most against going to this thing, and I won't mention his name, but he was most against this thing, was the most involved. You know, and this was a white police officer who had a lot of time on the job, who's done a lot of police work, who's worked in Roxbury his entire career. After that first engagement with the youth back in 1995, we continued to go and we stayed involved. And it's grown over the years to what you see today. And I know it makes Stanley proud, and it makes me very proud to know that this program has moved in the direction it has. Particularly after spending 10 years in the homicide unit, and majority of my cases, unfortunately, have been nothing but young black males who have been murdered in the city of Boston. And so many early morning hours, I've had to go and knock on the doors of mothers who've lost their loved ones and watch them crumble at my feet after I have to tell them, and there's no way to say it, right? At 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I have to go find someone, I have to notify the next of kin, I have to find a mother, an uncle, a relative, whoever it may be. All I can say is, I'm sorry, but your son is dead. He's been murdered. There's really no other way to say it. There's no other way to there's no other way to table it. It is what it is. Like Monalisa had said earlier, and she opened my eyes to this when we worked together when I was a deputy superintendent. For me, I have to be clinical when I do this work because I have to get the bad guy. I have to keep my mind clear and stay focused on the investigation. But Monalisa opened my eyes to the fact that, you know, there's also trauma that people suffer, and when I do go and I present this information to a family and I watch the things that go on afterwards, and I get to leave in like 10 minutes, although I am going to the autopsy and I am continuing the investigation, it's the family that suffers more than anyone else. And then there's a ripple effect, right? So when someone passes away, and so they don't pass away, when they're brutally murdered in the street, right? There's a ripple effect that happens to the community. Another thing that Monalisa opened my eyes to is the fact that, you know, when people come out in the morning and there's someone laying on the ground with a sheet over them, that causes dramatic stress and pressure to a community, particularly a community of color, which I've worked in my entire career. So working together and building these relationships with Mothers for Justice and Equality, Tina's group, Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, and other groups, and of course the Reverends who've been helpful as long as I've been on the job, in the Youth Violence Strike Force when we do home front and different things like that. Building these relationships and these partnerships is what's important, and I believe is what makes this city so successful. And a group like Teen Empowerment just kind of gets to the root of what kind of needs to be done as far as police-youth relationships. We have to keep moving in the right direction. We have to keep moving forward. I know nothing but community policing. That's all we were taught from the time I've got on the job, so I don't know anything else. I've read the 21st Century Policing Report that was developed under President Obama, and the first pillar of that report is building trust and relationships with the community. It's something we at the Boston Police Department have been doing my entire career. But it's programs like this programs like teen empowerment that continue to build these relationships of trust between the police and the community. Open dialogues, spending time with these groups, showing them what we do as a police department, showing what needs to happen in order to move these cases forward is what it's all about. It has to be about engagement if we're going to get anything done. I've talked to detectives from Chicago, and essentially all they do is triage these cases from one case to the other to the other. And they're all essentially the same. And they're only going on in communities of color. So I do believe that these types of programs spread out amongst this country, around this country, would work wonders to make this nation a better place. It's not always just about the police. It's not always about going out and locking people up. It's about developing relationships with the community, about me being able to pull over and talk to Tay, someone who's half my age, but be able to have a dialogue with him, and he can tell me what's going on in the street, and I can tell him what's going on with me as I'm running around out in the street and dealing with different things. You've seen Zach Crossan on there. The kid was probably 2 years old when I was on the job. But he talked about the importance of having these relationships, the fact that when he's driving around in Roxbury, and he's a guy with not much time on the job, but to be able to develop a relationship with Dante is going to move his career forward in the right direction. And these are the types of things we need. Not the police being an occupying army, as we all know, but having relationships, having to be able to get out. Hey, do we get a call for a gun in a particular location? Absolutely, we get them all the time. But if I can get out of my car and get to that location and have a conversation with some guys who may not have a gun, then I may be able to find the person who has a gun in a better way than just getting out and shaking everyone down, right, and doing stop and frisk and all these other different things. And I think our department, Boston Police Department, has really moved deeply to kind of do these types of engagements. The gang unit is a completely different gang unit from when I came on. So, again, these relationships and the engagement between the police, open dialogue, and community relations with groups like Mothers for Justice and Equality, Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, the walks we do with the Reverends, Operation Nightlight, and the flashlight walks and different things that the community is constantly doing goes to the fact that we can reduce fear, fight crime, and improve the quality of neighborhood in our neighborhoods and policing. Thank you.
So if I had another hour, I would go through that for you. I'll just say now, because I want to give time for some discussion, is that teen empowerment is a complex set of steps to get to the place where Tay, who has enormous amounts of perception about what's happened to him in his life, could come to a point where he's able to engage in this conversation, right? So there's a process in place, and it really begins on the bottom with that set of beliefs. You have to understand what the potentials are if you're going to be able to recognize those potentials. And it moves up from there. There's a lot that goes into teen empowerment, and if you want to take a look at our website, you can go into some of the details of it. Behavior management pieces to it, the use of interactive methods, learning how to do planning processes, with the whole, with the goal at the top of having community-wide change, and that's really important, community-wide change, because as John was talking about, there's the ability to be able to intervene in these problems, okay, and that's important. Knowing somebody's name on a street corner is like huge. If you go up to a group of people, imagine you're going up to a group of people, you got some kind of complaint that there's noise or whatever. If you can say hello to one of those people and say their name, you are in so much better shape than if you're going up there and you have no connection. So there's the intervention, but if you can inculcate the youth culture with a sense of responsibility and an understanding of their really own self-interest, then you can change the aggregate. And that's what we have been able to do in the city of Somerville. We've had tremendous impact in the city of Somerville, where we've been able to do teen empowerment at scale. And that's really the problem. I mean, Boston has made huge strides, but it is not at scale. There's 2,000 police officers, and I would hazard a guess that probably maybe 10% have been involved in this. And it's a money issue, you know, because you have to take people off the street to do this stuff. And so now you're choosing between having the police officer interact and having the bank robbed down the street or whatever. So you have to be able to do both of these things. There needs to be a commitment of resources and a philosophic commitment and understanding. So I'll leave it there so we can get to the discussion part. But thank you so much for your attention.
Thank now like to invite Mr. Harris up for a brief response, and then we're going to open it up to question and answer.
So, good evening, everyone. I'm going to try to be brief tonight. I'm going to be brief tonight, I think. So, I'm really glad to be here. Let's see, how do I get this to project? And I think, you know, I distinguish myself from the other panelists insofar as I'm not a practitioner per se, and I want to try to think about a little bit of context for what's going on here. I think the sergeant teed up what I'm going to get to very much, because I think one of the biggest things that we at the Houston Institute are concerned about and determined to do is to bring to scale those things that work. But I want to tell you a little bit about the way we approach the work we do. Thank you. Several years ago, I was asked to go to give a talk at the Kirwan Institute, and I was asked to give a talk that talked about race, but didn't enter the conversation by talking about black people. And that was a challenge, right? Because that's the way we do. That's what we talk about. We talk about race, oh, you're talking about black people. And at the time, we had been doing a lot of work on the death penalty. And for those of you who don't know, the greatest predictor of who will get the death penalty is what? Race of what? No. Race of victim. The greatest predictor of whether the death penalty will be invoked, sought, or invoked is if the victim is white. So that's how I decided to enter this conversation, thinking about white victims. Thinking about the fact that our society was devoting a huge amount of resources to the vindication of a small number of white victims, right? And at the same time, communities of color were starved of resources. And the question that this posed for us is, what kind of society are we that chooses to allocate resources that way? Right? Now, there are lots of answers to that, and the answer is, it's an unjust society. But, you know, I'm not going to go down that dark path. It's getting even more and more unjust. But the other part of the answer is that we aren't really deciding. Right? That decision isn't really being made by all of us. Those decisions are being made by some above us. Right? And that gave rise to what we call community justice. And community justice is a really simple idea, but it is this. It is that those communities that have been degraded and underinvested by the war on crime and war on drugs need to have a role in determining the policies that are going to be addressed to them. Right? And what we have done is, so there are a couple of things that I want to emphasize. I do think that the context for having this conversation today needs to be about justice, right? And I think one of the things I would like for each of you to do, and I always ask people to really try to think for yourself what justice means, okay? So in our work, for instance, we don't use the term thank you. Whoever's, look at this. I mean, something's wrong with this. Okay, I'm not going to go on. All right, so what we do is basically, we have this thing that we call the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, the Houston Marshall Plan for Community Justice. And very simply, what that idea is that we have in our communities across the country other organizations like Mothers for Justice and Equality, like the Louis D. Brown, like Teen Empowerment. And that these things, as Stanley said, need to be taken to scale, right? And the point is that we need to find ways for people in communities to become more engaged in determining the policies that affect them so that they can, in fact, lobby and promote the kinds of policies and the kinds of practices that address the needs that they have. So, and we do all this work through our website. I can't get this thing to show everything, but we have a number of topic areas. So we think that justice, we don't use the term criminal justice anymore. That's another thing I'd ask you is to eliminate that from your lexicon. We talk about safety and healing, right? And we believe that in order to recover from the devastation wrought by the war on crime and the war on drugs, somebody here earlier referred to something looking like a war zone. Well, that's what our cities look like. The violence that we're talking about isn't isolated. It's not just the violence, right? Our entire communities have been occupied, and in fact, the devastation is overwhelming. So our website is designed to try to identify programs across the country that are doing this kind of work. So we connected to a woman, Lily Estes, one of my heroes who was recognized by Mothers for Justice and Equality, a woman who lives in public housing in Richmond, Virginia, and her neighbor killed her son. Right? She walks past that person every day. But she walks past that person every day to organize. She's in the community. She's in the community organizing. And that's a story that we want to highlight. And the fact is that, as Stanley says, imagine if teen empowerment could be taken to scale. Imagine if, I can't remember the name of it, but the sandbox exercises were taken to scale, right? And so the issue is, how do we give people the information that they can use to insist that these things be brought to scale, as opposed to policies being imposed from above? And I think if we're going to try to do this work, we have to do it in a comprehensive way, and that's it. So I'm going to wrap it up in a kind of random. If you can tell, I'm also not feeling the best. But as I started to think about tonight, I was reminded of something that my grandfather said to me. And my grandfather was a Unitarian minister, all right? And he had a particular approach to faith that really emphasized humanism. He was a humanist, and I was raised as a humanist. But my grandfather would always tell me that death is for the living. And what he meant by that is that those of us who are left behind live with death, right? And what he taught me was that it's a mark of who we are, how we live with that death, and what we do going forward, right? So just shortly before my grandfather died, we were sitting watching the news, and there was a story about 2 young men who had been killed in Baltimore by the police. This was 1978, right? And he said to me, he looked at me, he said, "David, I wonder if we were wrong." Now, my grandfather had gone to Selma and marched. My grandfather devoted his life to nonviolence. He didn't pontificate. But what he meant was he wondered if we had been wrong in pursuing nonviolence. Now, I knew my grandfather very well, right? And I know that he didn't really doubt it. But the fact of the matter was he was at the end of his life, and he was reflecting on how he had lived his life. And a lesson that he was giving me was, David, you make sure that you live your life in a way that when you ask a question of yourself, you can come with a good answer. And so I leave you by saying, I think that's what we all have to do. I invite you to visit the website. It's really functional. It's kind of interesting. And, and partly this is my fault. I'm not so, but the other piece I would say is that let us know about other programs that you know of that are working. And we'll put them up there and we'll highlight them. That's both here in Boston and across the country. So now let them talk. Thank you.
Let's give a big hand to all our panelists tonight. I'm going to invite you back up here so that we can take questions from the audience. So if you all would join us back up here, Tina and Monalisa. And then we're going to open the questions, I believe, with the working group from RPP. Can I say it correctly? We're going to start off the questions, and then we're going to open it up to everyone. So I believe we have microphones out there, and everybody's seated. And hold on one second. We'll let Monalisa get seated. And then please, and just if you want to...
Is there another mic for the panel?
No, they're fine. They have...
Okay,
yeah.
great. Thank you. So hello, I'm Maria, and I'm part of the RPP class working group. First of all, we all wanted to thank you for coming and sharing your experiences and wisdom. From the readings, we were introduced to the issues of conflict and how you are working toward reconciliation. Now, from listening to what you guys shared today, we wonder, it's easy to give in to the anger and pain and even the helplessness when in the face of such experiences. And what kind of personal or religious convictions that inspired you to turn that into positive opportunity for healing?
You want to take that, Tina, or any? This is open question to all of the panelists.
Well, your question, it is easy to give in to the anger. Yet, research tells us that when we respond to families in the initial intervention with effective and equitable resources in a caring, compassionate, and coordinated manner, that anger is still there because anger is a part of our feelings. Yet, instead of channeling the anger to hurt others, that anger is then channeled to help and to rebuild. So it is the both and. When Lewis was killed, yes, I was angry. I'm still a very angry black woman. Yet, I do not allow my anger to guide me. I have to every single day before my feet hits the ground. And it's a mental decision. Whether it's my left brain, I'm gonna be pissed off at the world this morning because it is my right, or whether it's my right brain and me and God. Dear God, before I get out of this bed, please, please allow anyone that comes my way to see you through me. So it's a conscious decision every single day, every minute, every hour, every second.
Does anybody else want to add to that about?
Do you want to answer?
I would say I remember when when we started Mothers for Justice and Equality, Kim Odom was very much part of that, and I remember her, Reverend Kim Odom. I remember her saying, "Hope needs to speak," and that we need to see hope in our community, and I really kind of felt like those words really resonated with me. That that we needed to see hope in our community. That we needed to see that beacon of light shine very brightly. And I remember Merva Chambers, who had lost her son, and she would say that that justice for me meant not seeing that the perpetrator went to jail. It was more about seeing that no other mother experienced what I experienced. And so I think when you, when you're going through it and you see that type of courage and conviction come from a place where there's no real understanding, like you can't even measure that, then I think you begin to know that there is such a greater, power. And I think that's what really kind of brings the faith into action. That it's built on that faith. It's built on that hope. It's built on that belief. And there's no rational answer for how any woman, mother, father can lose a child. It's not even natural. And rise up and begin to be a beacon of hope in the midst of such a storm. There's no answer to that. And so we just have to know that there's something greater that's going on.
Anybody else?
Add briefly, after the cameras are gone and, from these horrific events, that's where it's really important. And the transferring all that grief into action, I think that is what Monalisa is talking about, and Tina as well, is really an important thing. And I think that's particularly important when you're talking about young people, because they have a tremendous resiliency because they're still young, and they can really become inspired leaders and use that pain to really do some incredibly great things. And I've seen it over and over again. I mean, resolve gang conflicts and, really be leaders in their community, transform themselves and transform what happens around them, and actually make things happen like reductions in suicide rates and reductions in homicide rates and better school and all those kinds of things if they're given the opportunity. And on the other hand, if you leave it, the kind of ugliness that can come out of it is incredible. So, the kinds of work, and again, it gets back down, it really comes to scale. There's not like a one program, one approach. There's all of these things need to be supported, and it'll pay off tremendously for society if we kind of get that one.
Okay. Another question? Did you have a question? Please. A microphone down here.
Thank you so much, all the panelists. My name is Rod. I'm with the Racial Justice and Healing Initiative here at HDS. And I also want to offer a personal testament to having done Peace Play at the Institute. It was startlingly powerful in a very simple way. It felt like playing with toys, but it actually opened up a lot more. And I think it was just a powerful modality, and I hope to see it more used. I guess my question is, so here at HDS, I've been told that we train ministers. And I wonder, how can we be supported more as students of ministry to face the violence that's occurring out in our communities? Not just in our congregations and parishes and so forth, but in our actual communities and streets. What do you think we should be prepared with and armed with as we enter into the world?
I would answer that, if I may, that God did not.
You may.
You certainly may. I was thinking about a text. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So I would say that the best thing to arm yourself is this notion of getting through fear. I think what happens to us, especially in the academy and other places, you're in your silo, and it's easy to talk about things, and then you're a little maybe more reticent to get out into. So every one of these organizations and these people have volunteer efforts, and they would welcome you, as you know, to step out into the community and do something.
And for us, I was going to say, I'd be careful how I answer that, because probably with the ministers in here, I'd be kicked out. So I think for us, and we do have a spot, we have Peace Fellow internship, because we would get a lot of volunteers, especially a lot of young white students coming in wanting to know about gangs and guns. And for me, then this is not the place for you to volunteer. My community is more than gangs and guns. I want you to look at the assets of my community, not the deficits of my community. So when they came in, by the time they left, it was more about healing, reconciliation, accountability, and peace. There's Jolie. She was a student. I'm not sure which school she went to, because I always get in trouble mentioning the wrong school. But she needed to do something in her ministry. She's studying to be a minister, Unitarian Universalist. And we sat, and she wanted to do guns and gangs, and says, wrong organization to do that in. And so we talked, and her passion came out, and we helped her to develop Piecing It Together, which is one of our programs for our white allies in the suburbs, our white ministers who want to come into the community, who want to do something. And so that's a 6-week program where suburban churches come in and they are working on their own internal issues, their own internal healings, so that they can go back to their community and address the issues. So there's always opportunity with us, with MJE, I know with Teen Empowerments, and with many others here. And I'm gonna just put it out, one of my spiritual advisors, Dr. Reverend Lisette Wright, has a group of which I'm a part of, the Chaplain, that again, ministering God's peace through the hearts of survivors, helping us to create Bible studies that are talking about, not preaching at us what God wants us to do, but really helping us, providing a safe space to really show the God in us to the larger society. So opportunities are always there. Always invitation, never invasion, always opportunities, and never demand. So welcome. We invite them, right, Monalisa?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Thank you. So I would say I would echo that with Tina and Reverend Walker, because it's called cultural responsiveness, right? So communities that have been plagued with this violence and a history of trauma, untreated, repeated, the culture changed, right? The fabric of the community eroded. And so you have to understand, what is the culture that you're walking into, right? So you can't save nobody, you can't fix nobody, right? The only thing you can do, and I'll take this from Job, right? And if I get it wrong, I'm at the theology school. So only thing you can do is listen and be there and don't judge. Don't assume that happened because of, right? And I'm talking about Job's friends. Y'all know what I'm talking about? So don't assume that happened because that person was in a gang, or that family is poor, or that mother wasn't a good mother, or it's just in the generation of the whole community. Those things are real. And whether it is or is it or if it's not, right? That doesn't matter. If you're there to help, to support, to encourage, to be that hope, that you may be the only Jesus that they may ever see. And if you're there for those reasons, then the only thing you're really there is to be silent and support the family. Listen, wait, and watch and see what they need, and then move, right? Don't make it your mission and to fulfill your purpose. Be there to serve and fulfill their purpose and their needs. And that takes, true servitude, right? And humility, that you are not there to save them. And they may be there to save you.
I just add one thing that I think is important. If we wait and we just build our relationships around, these tragedies that happen, that's a real missed opportunity. And, as leaders of churches and congregations, which many of you, I guess, will become, that seems to me to be a core mission of spiritual work, is to overcome the barriers which are so clear in our society, right? I mean, that is a huge problem. We live in very different worlds. I live in Arlington, I work in Roxbury. Wow. These are different realities. And there's no way that, people are very well-intentioned, but if they sit out in Arlington, they're not going to understand what's happening in Roxbury. And really vice versa as well. So and it's a tremendous amount of effort. It's really a lot of effort. But as a society, that's what we need to do. We need to take down the barriers and, really develop ongoing relationships across those barriers of race and class. That's where we can make real progress.
We can open it.
Can I elaborate?
I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
I just want to elaborate a little bit. They pretty much said the basis, but I just want to say my input. I think one thing you need. So I'm also in part of the church community too. So I'm a deacon in training at New Canaan Church of God in Christ in Roxbury off Washington Street. And so but this is kind of it's not irrelevant, but it's to it. So my sister's husband, he's a youth president and also a deacon at State Temple Church of God in Christ out there in Roxbury near Ruggles. And so one thing, some of the things we do, he works with the youth. He's a youth president, so he tries to events, he tries to plan on events with the youth, that youth of the group, not just teenagers, but the youth to 5-year-olds and to that youth. And one thing I could say you need to in order for to really reach out to the youth and to get them to understand is patience, and I just had the word on top of my tongue.
That's all right.
I'm gonna talk about this.
Take your time.
What Monalisa said, kids, sometimes you're gonna meet a lot of kids with different backgrounds. I'm from Dorchester, and I'm here in Cambridge, talking to you guys. So you're gonna have to understand that when kids talk to you and give their little testimony and talk to you whoever they need, just listen to them and don't try to lecture them. It's always good to lecture a kid, like for them to get that knowledge, education, patience, and educating. You need to give them the patience to understand what they're going through, to really listen, to know that this is not just a little issue he's bringing up. This is something that's hitting him in the heart. And with educating, you need to, like I said, not lecture, but in a way of educating them to try to advance them to move up in life. So for a student, if I was still into the gang life, and I talked to you about how I'm with these friends and they just been ganging, and I haven't I'm really not feeling it. I'm just scared of what to do. Talk to him, and instead of telling him hey, you're hanging around with the bad crowd, don't hang with them. No, that's just gonna give me that negative feeling that I'm doing something wrong, and nobody should feel like they're doing something wrong. But it's also good to educate them and let them know that hey, yeah, you hang this little bad crowd, but I know this little organization such as Teen Empowerment, that where they actually have a little circle of youth where that they probably come from the same background as you or pretty different backgrounds. You can sit and talk about the issues with one of the people you know there. You can talk the issues and go through it. So I feel just education and patience.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to open it up. Thank you. To anybody else with questions? I think this gentleman here has been very patient.
Well, first and foremost, thank you all for coming and spending your Thursday night with us. Really appreciate it. Also, thank you for your vulnerability and candor. And Tay, thank you so much, too, for the work that you're doing, particularly among your peers. This question is for Sergeant Detective. I'm just curious, in your work, you mentioned with the anecdote that you started out with that it was very difficult for you to get your colleagues to go to organizations and programs like the one that you're a part of. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what is the biggest impediment to getting police officers to engage in programs like this? And what are some solutions you think you can introduce or you have worked to introduce to kind of change the culture and incentivize?
Yeah, great question. So when I came on in '95, we were kind of under a traditional police type model of policing. And community policing was really a big deal during my academy training. And that's kind of was the mantra of the police department was community policing. However, at that time, there was still a lot of gang violence going on. There was a lot of different things going on in the street. We did have that one year when no one got murdered, which was truly the Boston miracle. And we got through that by having these different relationships with the clergy and with the community. So what we're doing now, as you can imagine, is de-escalation training is a really big deal among law enforcement. It's trained now at the police department. We also do have youth dialogues that go on during the police academies now, which didn't happen when I was there. We have a black female superintendent who's in charge of the police academy now. So she has kind of moved the academy into a different direction, much different than it was in the past. Her name is Lisa Holmes. And I think it's those types of trainings what makes guys like that Zach Crossan you've seen on the video able to go out and develop these relationships with the kids in the street. So that's been maybe a 15-year period that we've seen it change over the years. So the change is happening, it's real, and I think it's going to move nationwide, particularly with this 21st century policing model, which is really kind of based upon community policing that's been going on kind of since the early 90s. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think there's still a lot of work to do, particularly nationwide, not just in Boston, when it comes to policing. And one of the main thing is to develop these relationships, particularly between police and youth, because that's what's happening, right? Youth are being arrested, youth are being murdered, youth are being incarcerated. So if we can break through these barriers and develop these relationships, I think we'll be doing okay. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
I just want to add one thing to that. I mean, the police are caught in the middle. So if you have a highly dysfunctional community, right, where people's needs are just not being met, and you have a certain level of violence, the fear in police just goes right through the roof. And then you're going to have all kinds of violations because it just comes out of their vulnerability, right? So if we just look at it as we have to improve relationships between police and youth and police and community. That certainly is a very important part of it. But you got to look at, I mean, if you go into Chicago and you listen to the people in Chicago, which I haven't been in Chicago, but I've seen some of the videos of them interviewing, folks are living in communities where they have absolutely no opportunity to break out of poverty whatsoever. That's just a recipe for disaster. So, it's got to be you've got to give opportunity. One of the things teen empowerment is working on, we work to develop relationships with the police, and at the same time provide opportunity for youth to be positive, to change those value structures. So if you can lower the amount of dysfunction among youth, increase the functionality of the police, then they kind of meet together, right? So you got to do both ends of those things. You can't just kind of say, well, let's just, the police are bad and so forth. I mean, if you go into Baltimore and see what's going on in Baltimore, it's more than just police violence. It's really a societal violence. Really an attack on a whole group of people.
And for policing, it's constant training. You can't just go through the academy for 6 months and think you're all set. You have to stay with this thing. You know what I mean? You have to have these continuous dialogues with the kids in the street and be involved and be part of the community, not just a policeman who's out there. So it's kind of a thing that has to remain constant.
Thank you. I think we had a question over there.
Thank you all for your presentation. I'm Dr. Carol Marie Webster, and my work, I work between the intersection between gender, religion, and performance, as in how you're living your day-to-day. I'm really intrigued by what Tina has been saying in terms of the use of anger as a motivator for positive change, to not assume that the anger bad, let's run. Yes, especially in situations, the types of situations that you're speaking about, in which the society can get locked, the community can be locked in a double bind. Yes, so the response of anger would be healthy. Yes, you should be angry and PO'd. Yes, that you are living in constant violence and that there is no way out. This is actually a healthy response to being socially incarcerated. Yes? Okay. What Tina has offered is an interesting formula, that the anger is there and it can work as a vehicle for propelling the community into dialogue with itself and into dialogue with those who are state-bound to manage, in quotes, the community. And I'm thinking about what you have offered for the community itself, as well as for the persons who are policing, and how that can break down the barriers. And I sort of want to get a deeper understanding of your formula. Yes, so I'm using this moment to solicit your time.
So that's a different conversation.
Yes, I'm just letting you know that. Yes, so but I wanted to also thank everyone for their presentation. This was absolutely excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're going to, with that eloquent statement, end our discussion this evening. We want to thank you all for being here. We want to thank this incredible panel who took the time to talk with us, and we'll have some more time after this. I was supposed to wrap this up, but I just want to say the most hopeful thing I heard tonight was when Tay said, and I don't remember exactly the whole sentence, but you said working with these fine police officers. I have never heard an African American or a child of color say that in this country ever. So I just want to say thank you for that, because that was really helpful. I mean that. That was wonderful. And I know that was a heartfelt statement, and I hope I quoted you a little bit. As you have seen and heard from our panel, this work to end violence in our neighborhoods is enduring, it is varied, it is deep, it is creative, and it is personal. I started this night by defining violence in broader terms, and I just want to emphasize what has already been said so well, that we cannot deal with violence until we deal with homelessness, until we deal with racism, until we deal with all the injustices in the world. But here's the other subtle thing that you've got to remember. There are voices out here that tell you there are us and there's them. And it's always got to be that conflict, and there's always got to be that confrontation. I've been all over the world I have talked to Belgian women, and I've talked to African women, and you know what? There is only us.
Amen.
Yeah. And until we begin to see that, as you have heard here, it's not going to ever work. So I thank you for being the us in making the difference. And I turn this back over to Dean Hempton. Thank you.
I've only got 43 announcements, so you should no, I've got very little to say other than just repeat the thanks for our wonderful panel. I guess the summary is just, it's not okay, is a great summary. And how to scale what has been presented here, you know, in our city, how it can be scaled beyond, I think is something to think hard about. So our next session is on February 9th. Please get on our mailing list, get behind us and support us in this initiative at the Divinity School, which is gaining strength, and I think is going to be something of really substantial significance here and beyond. There's a reception now in the lobby. We can talk to these great people a bit longer if they have the stamina to stay with us. And I just close by thanking everyone for an inspirational evening. And we have some gifts. We come bearing gifts for our distinguished guests. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, you know that.
Yeah, no, I do.